Thank you, everybody, for coming. The title of what I'm going to talk about today is Michigan's Blueprint for a Brighter Future. So, about 4.5 years ago, some of you might remember seeing this on the news or have been around. I live in Midland, Michigan. That's where Mackinac Center's headquarters is, so we do have the Lansing office. So about 4.5 years ago, during the height of kind of the COVID pandemic, Midland experienced a flood. We had a dam in the town next to us burst that flooded out about 8,000 homes or so in Midland. And I enjoy fishing, so I have a couple of small fishing boats. And so when these flood waters were rising, we were kind of at this point where people didn't know how high was the water going to go from this dam. And it had flooded out many basements, and people were worried about what level it was going to go to. But when the dam burst, I was going around with my boat, kind of picking up people, picking up valuables, picking up pets, things like that. So one of my friends calls me. Him and his wife are out of town on vacation, and he gets a hold of me and he said, "Hey, I saw that you had your boat. I was wondering, could you get to our house? Here's where the key is. I'm worried about something very valuable to me. In my basement are my guns. So I have my guns in my gun case down there. I'm worried about them getting water in them. Could you go there and maybe move them up to the top floor so they don't get wet?" So I said, "Yep, sure." Give me the information, and I headed over to his house. And then I found out, he called me back a little bit later, and he told his wife, "Hey, it's okay. We're going to be fine. The home will be fine." And I sent my buddy Jarrett. He's going over to take care of some of the valuables. And then he called me back and he said, "Oh, by the way, my wife is also wondering if you can grab our wedding album, which is right nearby." So one of the things that the Mackinac Center has learned from my friend, at least that I have learned, is the importance of priorities. So you can think what you want on his priorities. I know we got some gun lovers in here thinking, yeah, that kind of makes sense. This is our list of priorities. There's so many policy issues. I'm sure you're all seeing all the ads. You might have heard we're a swing state. I think we have an election next week. But you got to focus on priorities as a policy institution. And our job is to focus on these most important public policies and also for the longer term ones. So most of what I'm going to talk about are not things that are going to get turned around in a short amount of time. They are what we think are the biggest issues that we have to get right, with a particular focus on ones where Michigan is out of whack with the rest of the country, and particularly our surrounding states. So you've probably seen that the other year the governor, she established a population commission. Michigan has been struggling with population, and we were once a growth state for the first half of the 20th century. We were growing very rapidly, and then that began diverging, and we've struggled with population. There's been points where we have done better than others. It's kind of commonly thrown around. We've been struggling for 50 years. We have had spurts of growth over that 50-year time period. And the Governor's Population Commission, which had, I guess I'll be generous, a couple of good ideas, but many that were bad ideas or were not going to be real effective. And so what you hear, if you hear from people about what's our trouble with population, one thing is, well, we're a cold state. It's just about the weather. Well, we've had the same weather for all that time period, including times when we were growing quite a bit. And some of our fastest growing states, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, they got cold winters, and they're growing very rapidly. And by growth, I mean not just population, but also income and job growth. And then, of course, it's hard to explain weather being a massive reason for changes when, California, about the most temperate, beautiful state, is shedding people to the desert states of Arizona and Nevada. And it can't be all geology and natural resource. We've got good natural resources. And we have many that are much better than other states. We share an international border with our largest trading partner. We have a connection to the Great Lakes. We have all of this water that we talk about. And so all those things are extremely valuable. And then, so a lot of reasons why people move, and sometimes that they don't even realize, is based on public policy in one way or another. And if you hear from normal people or you ask, oh, why did you move here? They will mention things. I got a job here. I found a home that was affordable. I found good public schools. I just noticed it was a lot easier to live here than somewhere else. Joe mentioned being an expat from Illinois. My family came, when they arrived in this country on both sides, arrived in Illinois. And I'm sad to say I've gone through what many in Michigan, which is most of my family is now out of that state. And that is very public policy based. All right, so what are the problems? Here's kind of our map. This is the map of population. You can kind of see when we began diverging away. We're a growth state basically up until 1960, 1970. And then besides a couple of years here and there, we've mostly kind of flatlined compared to the rest of the United States. And so let's talk about the biggest issues and the things that we have to get under control. These are big issues that hit homeowners, and they're big things where our public policy is not in line with what we believe we need. Energy. So Michigan has, we need reliable and affordable energy. And on both reliability and affordability, we're going in the opposite direction. Of course, everybody believes we need reliable and affordable energy. Every politician, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, everybody will say the same thing. But we are making policy decisions taking us away from that. I'm sure some people in this room might remember, but probably most people don't. You think about energy as hopefully the lights turn on. Here's what my bill is every month. And that's usually what most people think about. But from 2000 to 2008, Michigan, we moved to a fully competitive electricity for how you got your electricity at home. And many other states have that, where you could have a choice among providers in who you want. In 2008, we got rid of that. We said, we are going to hand a monopoly to two companies, and that's who you're going to get your electricity from. And then at the same time, we were pushing mandates on top of these electricity companies, many saying, here's the type of energy you have to provide. You have to get much more from wind, solar. You have this renewable portfolio. We began shutting down the more reliable parts of the energy we had, coal plants, nuclear plants, natural gas. And that has caused us to come towards this almost crisis point in the state. So you may think, okay, yeah, everyone knows we pay higher energy prices. By the way, before we changed our law to do the monopoly, we had the lowest electricity rates in the Midwest. 15 years ago, we had the lowest rates in the Midwest. Today, we have the highest rates, and it's by far the highest rates. Maybe it was worth it, right? If it meant things got more reliable, it has not. Our power outages are far higher than other states. And these are really serious. We've had people die here in the state of Michigan. If your electricity goes out and you can't get reliable energy, both from freezing and then also from if you have to run a generator, we've had carbon monoxide poisoning and things like that. So our recommendation is we go back to a fully open, competitive electricity system. You can choose your provider, let them compete over people, and the state needs to stop this rushed closure of reliable forces and sources of energy. We need to do a full accounting of what the true costs of are. Because you will hear people say, well, I was talking to a friend on the left the other day who said, well, don't you know? I mean, solar and wind are more affordable. That's a more affordable source of energy. And if a lawmaker is telling you something's more affordable, oh, and by the way, we have to mandate it, you should be suspicious. You should be suspicious of something. And so we need to get back to a competitive system and open sources of being neutral technologically on where those sources of energy are coming from. We spent a lot in the introduction talking about education and educational opportunities. So during the COVID pandemic, we heard and saw in the news about school districts in the state locking students out of buildings and trying to go to an online type educational system. I have 4 kids. 2 of them were in school at the time. And that really showed a lot of parents that there are a lot of union officials and public officials that prioritize other things in the school system besides educating children. But in one sense, we've had a 50-year lockout of kids in school, and that is not allowing low-income kids the opportunity to go to private school choices. JC talked about our great charter school network here in Michigan, but charter schools still face many, many obstacles that other schools do not, in terms of limits on where they can raise their money, in terms of the state actively trying to discriminate against them and what kind of operators do what, trying to add extra regulations on top of them. And we are surrounded by other states that are doing school choice at the private school level. And 14 states, just in the last 4 years, have moved to a fully open school choice where you can take almost the entirety of the money that your children get to go to school and go to the choice that you want. Public school, charter school, private school, funding for tutoring, funding for homeschooling, that type of thing. And of course, we touch Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio, who are all in the top 10 in terms of public school choice. Michigan's focus in terms of the K-12 education system, there's always talk about change and what we need to do, but we've really kind of focused on one thing, which is more money. If you extend this chart back to 1970, it gets worse. So we are spending so much more money than we used to per student, and yet we are not seeing the results in terms of any way that we can see measurably. Not in test scores, not in things like bullying incidents, not in parental satisfaction with the schools. And so it's another instance of spending more money and we're not getting the better results that we need. Next big blueprint item has to do with taxes. Michigan does have some advantages. We said, somebody else back there said they were from Illinois too. One way that we're ahead of Illinois is on taxes, and people move for taxes. Michigan does have an advantage. We have a flat income tax, unlike most other states. We have constitutional limits on property taxes. I'm sure many of you remember the early 90s and the 80s when property taxes were really getting out of control. That's especially important for people trying to find their first house and for seniors trying to hold on to a house that they've lived in for a long, long time. But we are still higher than many of our neighboring states. And one of the reasons that we are paying higher taxes than we need, not just on the property taxes, is that we are financing one of the most expensive corporate incentive programs in the country. And there's a lot of debate over select incentives and how important and how much money, and what if we spent this amount of money and we get this battery plant that's here for 30 years and employs all these people. And it's understandable. And I've had discussions with people that are aligned with me politically who said, look, this is about cutting taxes on certain groups of people, and isn't that a good thing? The problem is that almost by definition, you're counting on a board in Lansing to determine what are the future technologies and industries that are going to work for Michigan. And they tend not to do a very good job on that. You've entered politics into this discussion, and then from a more practical standpoint is they just don't work. The amount of corporate incentives that we are doing, which is almost a cover-up for all these other problems. You have a bad tax system. Well, a company says, I'd love to open in Michigan. I can't. We have these problems. Well, I know what we'll do. We'll give you a lot of incentives to open here, and we'll cap your energy rates. You've just covered up the problem that everybody else has to deal with. Every other corporation has to pay taxes. Every other household has to pay higher energy rates. And yet, much higher growth states than we are spend much less on trying to selectively subsidize different industries here in the state. This is a chart. The blue columns are the amount of corporate incentives that we're doing, select incentives every year, and then the orange line is the unemployment rate. There's really no, the overall incentives are not, they're not doing nearly enough in order to bring down an unemployment rate. Even if every incentive that we did here in the state of Michigan, it's billions of dollars, and even if every single one of those jobs comes into being, it's a minuscule fraction of the number of jobs that we have here in the state, and it's just not fair. Everybody has to pay higher corporate taxes for a few to get breaks. We could have completely eliminated our corporate income tax for the last 4 years for the amount of incentives that we're saying. So would you rather these 12 companies get these incentives or everybody pay zero? Pretty easy decision from my standpoint. Next issue is housing. This is obviously widely been in the news. Housing costs has been a major strategic advantage of Michigan historically. When we were a fast-growing state, we were a fast-building state. We didn't see these skyrocketing housing prices because developers responded very quickly. And even as we're a stagnating state in terms of population, we still need more housing. Family sizes have gone down, which means even for the same population, we actually need more houses in population. When young people want to move into a state, they need to be able to afford a single-family home, or they need to be able to afford an apartment, preferably one near where they work. And but this housing advantage has been squandered. And one of the reasons, I know we're on the west side of the state, I have been following, I'm happy to be on the west side for this talk because Grand Rapids, Muskegon, some of your cities have really been aware of this issue and have tried to get at this from what we recommend, which is the supply side of the equation. How do we get more building coming up more quickly? And some are doing real analysis. I talked to a lawmaker in West Michigan who they had worked on and been in city or county level and said, I didn't even realize what we were requiring of our developers to build. And they've taken some big shots at trying to take care of that. If you go to Metro Detroit, Oakland County in particular, but most of the metro area, that is among the strictest zoning requirements across the entire country. So we have And so for the state trying to get at this issue, what they've done is there are some talks at the local level on how do we increase supply. What can we actually do to right-size our regulations? But at the state level, unfortunately, they have not had that conversation. Most of the discussion at the state level has been, let's talk about why don't we give a $20,000 stipend for people to buy their first home? Or why don't we do incentives where somebody will give us a proposal, a nonprofit, a city, a developer, we're going to build 200 apartments and we'll pick up some large part of the cost. There's two main problems with that. One part of it is that we are now spending at the state level, even if every one of those apartments comes into being that we've talked about, that the state of Michigan is subsidizing right now, we will have spent $250,000 per apartment just in tax dollars, just the tax dollar pickup. And second, even if every single one of those that the state has as a plan right now that they're spending, approving over $1 billion for, it's about 1,100 units. 1,100 apartment units or houses across the entire state of Michigan is a blip on the radar. You can't do it. You can't subsidize enough to make a big enough dent in the supply side. We have to get at this part. We need to get at right-sizing licensing rules, speeding up the processing of permits. We got to eliminate licensing requirements. We need reasonable zoning standards. From my standpoint, the state of Michigan or local government should not be trying to micromanage how many parking spots that somebody needs to have in order to build an apartment building, or that somebody needs to say, actually, you can't build a home unless it meets over a minimum amount of home size, 3,000, 4,000 square foot home size, or the lot size needs to be at least this big. Every lot needs to be at least 2 acres or 1 acre to put a home on it. I think we should get out of micromanaging that, allowing the developers and the housing suppliers to get to work, to grow and to build much faster than we are doing right now. You can see our housing permits. I mean, the 90s we were growing, but we weren't growing that much faster than now. We're doing 3 times the number of permits back then that are going on in Michigan now. Labor flexibility, and labor choice. Michigan made some great strides over the past 12, 13 years. Spoiler alert, some of those have gone away. But really, even kind of zooming out a little bit, Michigan is really clinging to this kind of pre-World War II labor model. So membership rates are plunging, but kind of big labor and the traditional unions are really trying to hold on to this coercive model that they survived in. The rise of the unions in Michigan they were rapidly gaining membership originally, not from government forcing or getting involved, but from saying, we have a need here. We have people who want something because they're actually dealing with really tough conditions. There was a real interest in unionizing your workforce. But one of the other reasons for that is we had such a high percentage of workers in just a couple of industries that tended to be unionized. We don't have that world anymore. We now have a ton of different companies in different industries, and trying to unionize them and unionize them the same way doesn't work. The United Auto Workers, they're kind of the culmination of this mindset. They've lost members for decades. To counter losing members, they have expanded into other industries. They are now almost half public sector, public employees and half auto workers. So they're very close to, they shouldn't even be the United Auto Workers anymore. The UAW represents 25% of their membership are university employees. And they're clinging to this factory model where they try to get very stringent contract provisions. They fight technology. They want inefficient contract provisions that micromanage how the companies work. So not even on the salaries and benefits, but just on those things. And they're focused on that point. And if they don't get what they want, they go on strike. And that includes at the auto plants, but also on the university campus where you're striking over, Israel, Gaza, Palestinian rights. And that's a really old model that ends up causing a lot of inefficiency in the workplace. And then separately, states can actually have an effect on this. They can do things like say, hey, you can unionize and you can focus and bargain over contract benefits and salaries and healthcare or something like that. But in Michigan, we've backtracked. We used to limit kind of what you could somewhat over what you're bargaining over. And then now we're back to, of course, the repeal of the right to work law, trying to force people back into unions against their will, forcing them to fund hyper-political organizations, many of which don't represent the values that they hold. And then mandatory prevailing wage, bargaining rules that encourage strikes, encourage unrest. We had a UAW strike last year. We're kind of on the precipice of another one. And you just can't run some of the largest auto companies in the world, not efficiently, if you're constantly worried about strikes. It just forces you to make investments you already wouldn't make and forces you to take risks that you already wouldn't take. And yet our labor and union environment here is very focused on the past. Last area is fiscal responsibility. An interesting fact to me is that the state of Michigan and the state of North Carolina, the closest state to our population, around 10 million, is North Carolina. Our state budget, just on state items, not what we get from the feds, not what they get from the feds, we spend over $80 billion a year. They spend less than $60 billion a year. Does North Carolina have 25% better roads, better schools, better health care than we do? Probably not. It's certainly not showing up in the population statistics or the happiness of the people there, and yet we are spending so much more than other states of similar sizes. And the only answer to that is that we're spending it less efficiently than they are. And so our fiscal stability ratings, which is a measure of taxes related to the amount of debt, and trying to capture, are we getting a good bang for the buck for our services? We just aren't. We aren't here in Michigan. One of the reasons is debt. Our school retirement system, we're spending much more trying to make up for the pension debt. Promises from decades ago that are for people in the future from now that we're all trying to pay for right now. Our prison system. We have about 25% fewer workers in the prison system, but we're spending more on that system than ever before, adjusted for inflation, far more today than we used to. And the reason for that is that the benefits have gone up, and especially the benefits that we've promised retirees. So Michigan needs to get a hold on its budget. During this era with unprecedented federal money, we have jacked up spending far faster than population growth, far faster than inflation growth. And I really doubt that citizens are feeling better gains, better services from the amount of spending that we've done. It's far more likely that you're just getting extra waste. And so Michigan really needs to cap the amount of spending that we're doing every year, hold it to the rate of inflation and population growth, and any extra revenue that we bring in needs to go to something more productive. Number one, we got to get our fiscal house in order. So we need to get a hold on this pension debt, this $40 billion a year of money that we own retirees, people who are not going to be able to go back in the workforce if this fund gets in danger or we have to make cuts to it. And then the other side is we need to, any of that extra revenue while we hold spending in line needs to go towards doing what the fastest growth states are. Lowering our business taxes, lowering our property taxes, and moving towards a system where we entirely get rid of our income tax, which is what all of the fastest growing states have done.